Hi, Leo. Wow, guys. This reading feels really emotional right from the start. And honestly, the message coming through is pretty clear. You don't need to chase this person anymore. You don't need to convince them. You don't need to keep proving how much you care, because something is changing behind the scenes. I feel like this person is starting to realize that your energy isn't waiting around for them the way it used to.
Okay, they've been watching, they've been thinking.
And more importantly, they've been noticing. Noticing that you're focused on yourself. Noticing that you're no longer reaching for answers. Noticing that your silence feels very different now. And honestly, that's making them nervous. Because for the first time, they're starting to wonder what happens if Leo truly moves on. What happens if the person they thought would always be there suddenly isn't? Let's take a look at what's really going on here, because somebody has a lot more on their mind than they're letting on. Wow. The more I sit with this energy, the more I feel like somebody is becoming very uncomfortable with the reality they never thought they would have to face. Because for the longest time, this person genuinely believed you would always be there. Not because they didn't care about you. Not because they didn't value you. But because your presence became something they quietly relied on. Something they assumed would never really change. And that's what keeps pulling me toward the strength card sitting here. You know, there is something very different about your energy now, Leo. You're not pulling. You're not reaching. You're not trying to force a conversation that isn't happening. You're not chasing clarity. You're not chasing attention. You're not chasing anyone. And strangely enough, that's exactly what this person can't stop thinking about. Because they were used to you showing up, used to hearing from you, used to feeling your warmth, used to knowing that no matter how confusing things became, some part of you was still holding space for them. But something feels different now. Something feels quieter. And honestly, that silence is getting louder inside their mind every single day. Wow. I keep looking at the Six of Cups, and it feels like this person spends more time in memories than they would ever admit. Little moments, random conversations, things that probably didn't seem important at the time. A message, a laugh, a late conversation. The way you listened when nobody else did. The way you cared when they weren't giving much back. And now those memories keep resurfacing. Not because they're trying to think about you, but because they can't seem to stop. It's almost like your energy keeps finding its way back into their thoughts. Even when they're focused on something else. Even when they're trying to stay busy. Even when they're telling themselves they should move forward. You know, there is a feeling here that this person expected more time. That's the strange thing. They thought there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another chance, another day. And because of that, they became comfortable. Comfortable with waiting. Comfortable with postponing what needed to be said. Comfortable with assuming you weren't going anywhere. But now I'm seeing the Page of Swords, and honestly, this feels like somebody watching from a distance. Not necessarily reaching out. Not necessarily speaking. Just watching. Observing. Trying to understand what's happening with you. Trying to figure out why your energy feels so different. Because from where they're standing, Leo, it almost feels like you've redirected your attention back toward yourself, your own goals, your own happiness, your own future. And that is creating anxiety they weren't expecting, because the version of you they became familiar with was always investing energy into this connection somehow, even when you were hurt, even when you were confused, even when you weren't getting much in return. And now they're noticing that your focus isn't there anymore. Okay, I don't think they're fully understanding what they're feeling yet. But I do think they're becoming aware of what they're losing, and there is a difference. The Four of Cups keeps pulling my attention. This energy feels like somebody sitting alone with their thoughts, trying to ignore what they're feeling, trying to convince themselves everything is fine, trying to pretend this doesn't matter as much as it does. But the more they do that, the more obvious it becomes. Because underneath all of that resistance, there is worry, real worry. What if Leo is done waiting? What if Leo finally got tired? What if Leo stopped believing in this connection? What if Leo found happiness somewhere else? And honestly, I don't feel like those questions existed before. I think this person always believed there would be time. But time feels different to them now. The energy feels different now. You feel different now. And that's why this reading feels so emotional. Because somebody who once felt completely certain that you would always be there is beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, they should not have taken your presence for granted. Honestly, what keeps standing out to me here is that this person isn't just missing you. They're missing the version of themselves that existed when you were around. Because the more I sit with these cards, the more it feels like your presence brought something into their life that they didn't fully appreciate while they had it. And now that it's not as available as it once was, they're starting to feel the absence everywhere. I keep finding my eyes drawn back to the Six of Cups, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that feels obsessive. It feels quieter than that, more personal, more intimate, like somebody sitting alone during an ordinary moment and suddenly remembering a conversation from months ago, a random joke, a message they never answered properly, the way you checked on them when nobody else did, the way you remembered details that everyone else forgot. The funny thing is that memories rarely come back in the order we expect. They're not sitting there remembering the big moments. They're remembering the small ones, the things they thought would always be there, the things they assumed they would experience again whenever they felt ready. And that's what makes this energy feel so emotional, because they're beginning to realize that some opportunities don't wait forever. Wow. The star is sitting here, and there is something about your energy that still shines very brightly in this person's mind. Even if they're trying not to think about you, even if they're trying to focus on work, even if they're trying to distract themselves with other people, other responsibilities, other obligations, your energy keeps finding a way back. It's almost like every road somehow leads back to Leo. And I don't think that frustrates them as much as it used to. I think what frustrates them is the realization that they never told you how much your presence actually meant. Because while you were showing up consistently, while you were caring, while you were giving, they got used to it. They got comfortable with it. And now they're looking back at everything through a completely different lens. Okay, this person keeps replaying conversations. I don't know who that's for, but that's incredibly strong. Entire conversations. Things they should have said, things they wanted to say, things they wish they could take back. And some of these memories seem to show up when they're least expecting them. Driving somewhere, lying awake, scrolling through their phone, trying to focus on something else, and suddenly there you are again, not physically, but emotionally, like a memory that refuses to fade. The Nine of Swords is making this feel much heavier than they're letting anyone see. Because outwardly, this person may appear completely fine. They may look calm, busy, focused, normal, but privately, their mind doesn't seem nearly as peaceful. There are moments where they start wondering whether they misunderstood your value entirely, whether they spent so much time assuming you would stay that they never stopped to consider what life would feel like without you. And honestly, that thought seems to scare them more than they want to admit, because they can feel the distance, not necessarily physical distance, energetic distance, the kind of distance that appears when somebody starts pouring their energy back into themselves, the kind of distance that appears when somebody begins choosing their own happiness. And Leo, I feel like they're noticing that in you. They're noticing that you're becoming more grounded, more focused, more self-directed, and strangely enough, that makes them admire you even more. The Queen of Wands is creating this feeling where they can't quite look away, not because you're chasing them, not because you're demanding attention. Actually, it's the opposite. The less available your energy becomes, the more they seem drawn toward it. The more independent you become, the more they notice you. The more you focus on your own life, the more curious they become about what you're doing, who you're talking to, where your attention is going. And underneath all of that curiosity, there is longing. A longing they haven't fully figured out how to express yet. Because what they're missing isn't only the connection, it's the warmth, the loyalty, the feeling of being understood, the feeling that somebody was genuinely on their side. And the more those realizations settle into their heart, the harder it becomes for them to pretend that none of this matters. Honestly, there comes a point where memories stop feeling comforting and start becoming painful. And that's exactly where this energy feels like it is. Because I'm looking down at the Judgment card and it feels like someone is having a very difficult conversation with themselves. Not with you, not with anyone else, with themselves. The kind of conversation that happens when there are no distractions left, when the noise dies down, when the excuses stop working, when a person is forced to sit with their own choices. I don't feel like this person expected to end up here. I think they genuinely believed they had more control over the situation than they actually did. They thought they could take their time. They thought they could push certain emotions aside. They thought they could deal with this connection later. But later has a strange way of arriving much faster than people expect. And now there is this feeling of looking back. Looking back at moments they barely appreciated when they were happening. Looking back at opportunities they let pass through their hands. Looking back at conversations they avoided because they didn't feel ready. Wow. The Five of Cups feels heavy, not dramatic, not theatrical, just heavy. Like someone realizing that some of their biggest regrets weren't caused by what happened. They were caused by what didn't happen. Words they never spoke, effort they never made, feelings they never expressed. And the more they reflect on that, the harder it becomes to blame circumstances. Because I don't think this person is blaming anyone right now. I think they're starting to recognize their own role in the story. And honestly, that's uncomfortable. Because self-awareness sounds beautiful until it arrives. When it arrives, it usually brings accountability with it. And accountability isn't easy. Especially when somebody begins seeing how many times they chose distance when they actually wanted closeness. How many times they acted indifferent when they actually cared. How many times pride became more important than connection. The moon is creating this very quiet emotional atmosphere around them. There are things they're beginning to understand now that they couldn't understand before. Not because the truth changed, because they changed, and that's different. You can spend years looking at the same situation and suddenly see it differently when your heart is finally ready. I feel like they're revisiting certain memories from an entirely new perspective. Moments where they thought they were protecting themselves. Moments where they thought they were doing the right thing. Moments where they convinced themselves that walking away, pulling back, staying silent, or avoiding difficult conversations was somehow easier. And now they're not so sure. Because the further away those moments become, the clearer they seem. Okay, there is something here about Leo's consistency that they didn't fully understand at the time. The way you kept showing up, the way you kept believing, the way you kept giving chances, the way you tried to understand them even when they weren't making it easy. Back then, they almost viewed it as something permanent, something guaranteed, something that would always be available. Now they're seeing how rare that actually was. And that realization feels much bigger than they're admitting to anyone. The tower is sitting here, and I can feel this pressure building inside of them, not outside, inside. Because certain beliefs they've carried for a very long time don't seem to fit anymore. Beliefs about love, beliefs about vulnerability, beliefs about relationships, beliefs about themselves. It's almost like they're standing in front of a version of themselves they no longer recognize. And that can be unsettling, because if they were wrong about this connection, what else have they been wrong about? If they underestimated Leo, what else have they failed to appreciate? I don't think they're looking at you the same way they once did. The image has changed. The perspective has changed, and strangely enough, so has the way they see themselves, because regret has a way of holding up a mirror, not to punish somebody, but to show them what they were unwilling to see before. And this person feels closer to that mirror than ever. They're beginning to understand that some losses feel bigger precisely because they didn't have to happen. And that realization keeps growing louder every time they revisit the path that brought them here. You know, sometimes a person doesn't fully understand someone's place in their life until they start looking for that same feeling somewhere else. And that's the energy sitting in front of me right now. Not panic, not obsession, more like realization. A slow realization that keeps unfolding every time they interact with other people, every time they try to move forward, every time they convince themselves that they should be able to replace what they lost. Because what I'm noticing here is that comparison wasn't something they intended to do. It just started happening naturally. Someone says something and it reminds them of you. Someone laughs and it reminds them of you. Someone tries to connect with them emotionally, and somehow it still reminds them of you. And after a while, they begin asking themselves a question they never thought they would ask. Why does nobody feel like Leo? Wow. The sun is coming through so strongly here. There is something about your energy that continues to stand out in their memory. Not because you were perfect, not because you never made mistakes, but because you were real. You showed up as yourself. You cared as yourself. You loved as yourself. And the more distance exists between the two of you, the easier it becomes for them to see that. It's almost like certain details become clearer when they're no longer standing directly in front of them. Things they overlooked, things they took for granted, things they assumed would always be there. And honestly, I think this person is beginning to recognize just how much light you brought into their world, not in a dramatic way, in everyday ways. The kind of ways that quietly change somebody's life, the kind of ways that don't seem extraordinary until they're gone. Okay, the Queen of Wands is creating a very interesting feeling. Because this isn't just about missing your presence. It's about admiring you, maybe more than they ever admitted. There is something about your confidence, your warmth, your resilience, your ability to keep moving forward that keeps pulling their attention back towards you. And I feel like this admiration has grown over time. Especially as they've watched you continue living your life. especially as they've watched you stop centering everything around this connection. Because the truth is, part of them expected disappointment to stop you. Part of them expected heartbreak to change you. Part of them expected you to stay emotionally parked in the same place. But that's not what happened. Instead, you kept growing. You kept evolving. You kept becoming more of yourself. And the more they witness that, the harder it becomes for them to look away. The Ace of Cups feels incredibly emotional here, because underneath all the thinking, all the remembering, all the reflection, there is still affection. There is still tenderness. There is still a part of their heart that responds every time your energy enters their thoughts. You know, this person may have spent a long time trying to intellectualize everything, trying to explain everything, trying to understand everything logically. But feelings don't always work that way. Sometimes they simply remain. Sometimes they wait quietly in the background, and when enough time passes, they become impossible to ignore. That's what this feels like. Not a feeling returning, a feeling that never actually left. The Lovers is sitting here, and what strikes me most is how differently they view this connection now. There was a time when they focused on complications, obstacles, timing, circumstances, questions, doubts. Now their attention seems to keep drifting back towards something much simpler. How they felt around you, how natural certain moments felt, how easy it was to be themselves with you. And that realization seems to carry a lot of emotional weight. Because once somebody understands that a connection affected them more deeply than they originally believed, it becomes very difficult to pretend otherwise. I keep getting the feeling that your absence has taught them things your presence never could. Not because your presence wasn't valuable, but because some lessons only arrive when a person has enough distance to see the full picture. And what they're seeing now is someone who wasn't just important, someone who became unforgettable, someone whose energy continues to linger long after the conversation ended, someone whose impact quietly followed them into places they never expected. And the more they sit with that truth, the more their longing begins to transform into something much deeper than simple nostalgia. Something feels different in the energy here. Not because all the questions have disappeared, not because everything suddenly makes sense. What feels different is the attitude, the willingness. The way this person is beginning to look at their own life with a level of honesty they avoided before. Because when I look down at the Eight of Pentacles, I don't see somebody sitting around wishing things would magically improve. I see somebody becoming increasingly aware that certain things require effort, real effort, the kind of effort that nobody applauds, the kind that happens behind closed doors, the kind that forces a person to confront habits, fears, excuses, and patterns they've carried for years. And honestly, I think they're tired. Not tired of caring, tired of avoiding, tired of circling the same emotional lessons over and over again. You know? For a long time, this person may have believed that wanting something was enough. Wanting love, wanting connection, wanting happiness, wanting stability. But now they're realizing that wanting and building are two very different things. And that's where their focus seems to be shifting. Wow, the King of Wands is creating this feeling that they're becoming less interested in talking about change and more interested in embodying it. Because there was a version of this person who always had a reason for waiting, a reason for delaying, a reason for staying silent, a reason for putting something off until tomorrow. But eventually, tomorrow becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. And suddenly they're staring at a situation wondering how so much time slipped away. That realization feels incredibly powerful here, not in a dramatic way, more like a wake-up call, the kind that arrives quietly and refuses to leave. And the interesting thing is that I don't feel like they're motivated by guilt anymore. Guilt may have opened the door, but something deeper is keeping them moving. A desire to become someone they can actually respect. Someone whose actions align with what they feel. Someone who stops running every time life asks them to be vulnerable. Okay, the Strength card is showing up again, and it feels different than before. Before, I felt it connected more strongly to you. Now it feels like they're trying to find that energy within themselves. Not perfection, not fearlessness, just courage. The courage to sit with uncomfortable truths. The courage to admit mistakes. The courage to stop pretending certain emotions don't exist. Because I keep getting this image of somebody standing at a crossroads. One path feels familiar, the other feels uncertain. And for perhaps the first time in a long time, they're realizing that staying exactly the same may actually be the riskiest choice of all. There's also something happening around their future. The future feels more real now, not as a fantasy, not as an idea, as something they're actively thinking about. The people they want beside them, the life they want to build, the type of partner they want to become, the legacy they want to leave behind. And strangely enough, Those thoughts seem connected to you more often than they're comfortable admitting. Because every time they imagine a healthier version of themselves, every time they imagine stability, honesty, consistency, growth, your energy somehow appears in the background. Not because they're forcing it, because that's where their mind naturally goes. Temperance is creating this beautiful feeling of balance trying to return. Not perfect balance, not instant healing. Just a person slowly learning that extremes have never really served them. Avoiding everything didn't work. Suppressing everything didn't work. Pretending not to care didn't work. And now they're searching for a healthier middle ground. A place where they can be honest without being overwhelmed. Open without feeling exposed. Present without feeling trapped. Honestly, this part of the journey feels less about romance and more about maturity. Less about what they can receive and more about what they're capable of giving. Because somewhere along the way, they began understanding that meaningful connections require participation. They require consistency. They require effort. They require showing up. And the more they reflect on the kind of future they actually want, the more determined they seem to become about transforming certain parts of themselves before moving any further down the road they're currently walking. There is a nervousness in this energy that wasn't there before. Not the kind of nervousness that comes from uncertainty about feelings. Those feelings seem much clearer now. What feels different is the awareness that time hasn't been standing still. Life has continued moving. People have continued growing, and somewhere inside of themselves, this person is beginning to understand that opportunities can quietly disappear while someone is still trying to make up their mind. I keep seeing somebody pick up their phone and put it back down, type something, delete it, think about reaching out, talk themselves out of it, then find themselves right back in the same place a few days later. Because this isn't as simple as sending a message. It never was. What makes this difficult is everything attached to that message. The vulnerability, the uncertainty, the possibility that things may not be exactly as they left them. And honestly, I think that's what scares them most. Not speaking. But what happens after they speak? The Ace of Wands feels incredibly alive here. It's creating this sensation that something inside of them is refusing to stay dormant any longer. An idea, an impulse, a desire to act. To stop sitting on the sidelines of their own life. Because for so long this person seemed trapped between feeling and action. They felt everything. They analyzed everything. They replayed everything. But movement was another story. Movement required courage. Movement required risk. Movement required them to step beyond the safety of observation. You know, watching from a distance is emotionally painful, but it's also predictable. Taking action changes everything, and this person knows that. That's why the closer they get to doing something, the more anxious they become. Okay, the Eight of Wands is bringing a very restless feeling to the table. Like somebody becoming increasingly aware that they can't keep postponing what they've been thinking about. The mental debate isn't bringing them peace anymore. The waiting isn't bringing them peace anymore. The pretending isn't bringing them peace anymore. It's almost like every path they try to take somehow circles back to the same realization. There are things that need to be said, things they've carried for too long, things they've rehearsed 100 different ways in their mind. And every time they imagine saying them, their heart starts racing. Because what if Leo doesn't feel the same? What if Leo has moved beyond this chapter? What if Leo no longer wants answers? What if Leo no longer wants them? Wow. That fear feels very real, much more real than they're willing to admit to other people. Because I don't actually see somebody worried about embarrassment. I see somebody worried about loss. Someone worried that the window they always assumed would remain open may not be open forever. And that realization carries a surprising amount of emotional weight. The Knight of Cups feels softer, more sincere, because beneath all the overthinking, beneath all the hesitation, beneath all the anxiety, there is still a genuine desire to connect. Not to win. Not to control, not to manipulate the outcome, simply to bridge a distance that has felt too large for too long. There is a tenderness here that they usually keep hidden, a side of themselves they don't show often, a side that genuinely misses your voice, misses your energy, misses the comfort of knowing you're there. And the longer they sit with those emotions, the harder it becomes to dismiss them. The Judgment card is drawing my attention again, only this time it feels less like reflection and more like decision. Like somebody standing at the edge of an important moment in their own personal growth. Because eventually, every person reaches a point where they have to choose between fear and honesty. Fear says, stay where you are. Fear says, remain silent. Fear says, avoid discomfort. Honesty asks something very different. And I feel like this person has been standing between those two voices for quite some time. Honestly, what strikes me most isn't the anxiety. It's the fact that despite the anxiety, they keep returning to the same thought, the same person, the same connection. No matter how many distractions enter their life, no matter how much time passes, no matter how much they try to focus elsewhere, their heart keeps guiding them back towards something unfinished. And there is a growing awareness inside of them that some conversations become heavier the longer they remain unspoken. And honestly, that's where I'm going to leave this energy for now. Because at the end of the day, this reading isn't really about chasing anyone. It's about recognizing what happens when someone finally understands the value of a connection they once thought would always be there. Sometimes people don't realize what they've been holding until life asks them to imagine living without it. And for many of you, that's exactly what feels like it's happening here. So take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and most importantly, continue focusing on yourself, your growth, your happiness, and the life you're building. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. If this reading connected with your situation, feel free to let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Take care of yourselves, keep shining that beautiful Leo light, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye for now.